I'm about to make a lot of people mad when I say this, but I think Inoue is the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. I understand we got Crawford versus Canelo, and people think that's going to be the crowning of, the pound for pound champion. That Crawford versus Canelo is going to be the fight that determines who's the #1 pound for pound best fighter in the world. But it's false because it's Inoue, and let me tell you guys why. Inoue, you can see in his style that he has the ability to take risk, a lost art and a lost characteristic in the sport of boxing where a lot of people overrate the importance of hit and not get hit. And nowadays people are forgetting that boxing is a form of entertainment. That's what it started as. That's why the sport got popular. Let's not forget that. At the end of the day, I respect the hit and not get hit, but it's also associated with running nowadays. So which one is it? I think hit and not get hit is part of the sport of boxing, but people take it to a whole nother level to the point where it gets boring for a lot of boxing fans. And you can say, oh, you just don't understand what you're seeing. No, it's boring, and at the end of the day, like, we can't just slow-mo everything that Devin Haney or Shakur does. At the end of the day, I personally give a lot of credit to fighters that take risks, because in the sport of boxing, that's what it's about. You're not in this to be the businessman. At least you gotta pay your just due. A guy like Floyd Mayweather, a guy like Pacquiao, they're doing whatever they want now because they've earned that right, at the end of the day. And, back to Inoue, as good as guys like, Crawford and Canelo are, they're not fighting and cleaning out the divisions the same way that Inoue is. Now, Crawford, and Canelo obviously did that earlier, but there were still, you could talk about and argue that the Spence fight should have been made, earlier. The Canelo and Benavidez fight never got done. So that's what I mean. There are certain fights, Boots and Crawford, those kinds of fights should have happened as well. I mean, you look at a guy like Inoue and you see him cleaning out everybody. Everybody they put in front of him, he washes everybody. And the activity that Inoue has had is unbelievable. And the reason why I don't think Usyk is #1 pound for pound is because I don't really count heavyweight fighters in my pound for pound rankings, because it's not fair. It's not fair because heavyweights don't have to worry about making weight. And the heavyweights are popular. It's one of my favorite divisions to watch. It's entertaining. But at the end of the day, if we're talking about pound for pound, I can't put them into that conversation because they don't have to make weight. And ultimately, I always say that, the heavyweight division is about luck. Just because, you're beating a lot of these guys constantly. And I respect Usyk. I think he's a great fighter. Started cruiserweight and then moved up to heavyweight and became that champion. But I feel like, heavyweight champions nowadays aren't as good as the ones in the lower weight classes. Guys like Inoue, they're much faster. He has to deal with a much, difficult style when these guys are just as fast as him, the same size as him. In the heavyweights, it's like, you're fighting bigger guys, but if you're smaller, more agile, you could easily beat them. Or if you have a singular shot, like Deontay Wilder, you could become world champion just with having a singular shot. You don't even have to be a good boxer. You just need to land a shot. So that's why I don't really associate heavyweights with the pound for pound rankings, because at the end of the day, I see a lot of, chance and luck as opposed to skill in that division. Not to say that Usyk isn't skilled, not to say that Tyson Fury isn't skilled, because they're two of the most skilled heavyweights we've seen in probably the past decade. So, much respect to those guys, but I don't put heavyweights on my pound for pound list. And, for me, the pound for pound #1 fighter in the world is Inoue. Then you got Terence Crawford, and then you could, potentially put Usyk there. But, for me, I just don't see the heavyweights up there. But, great fighter. But Inoue's just so talented. He's so good at what he does, taking risks. Yeah, he's been dropped, but he, knows how to turn it on. A guy like Terence Crawford, another guy that's, very ferocious in that boxing ring. And you can see it. When he fought Sean Porter, they told him he was down, and then he went on to continue to stop Sean Porter. That was crazy. Another crazy moment. I just don't think Bud's active enough, and he's not fighting guys, naturally around his weight class like Boots. That fight should have been made. Virgil Ortiz. Those kinds of fights, I think, would have contributed to his activity and made him potentially #1 pound for pound. He's still up there, but I think Inoue's #1 because he's just so active, and he's putting on these fights where you can visibly tell he's going for the kill. He's putting it all on the line. He's not, being careful, and he's throwing caution to the wind to give the fans a good fight, to show fans what boxing's supposed to look like. And remember, he saved that weekend. where, you know, Ryan Garcia, Devin Haney, Canelo, they all had snooze fest fights, and then Inoue went in there and saved boxing. So, you know, Inoue's saving boxing. I think he's the #1 pound for pound fighter in the world. He's active, he's vicious, he's exciting to watch, and he's so talented. He's got, you know, everything. He's got the arsenal and he's got the confidence. So I got, you know, Inoue as #1 pound for pound. I think he's the most skilled, and, you know, you could put Crawford and potentially Benavidez there, and maybe Usyk, but I got, you know, Bam Rodriguez before I got Usyk. You know, that's just my opinion personally. I think those guys are just more skilled. But, you know, if Inoue gets that Nakatani fight, I feel like that will really solidify him in the people's eyes. I already think he's #1 pound for pound, but a lot of people are going to debate me and say that Inoue's not, you know, #1, it's Usyk, or that it's Terrence Crawford. But right now I think it's Inoue, just based on like what I said, the activity and what he's doing to every opponent, you know, watching them, you know, getting dropped and then coming back even harder. No Diddy. But I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know in the comments who you guys have #1 pound for pound. I got Inoue, but thank you guys for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed the video. Catch you guys on the next one. Peace.